get over. My name is Kevin Sidwar, and I assume if you're here, you have some interest in the Internet of Things. So we're going to be talking about how you can choose a platform. So everyone has an idea. I assume if you play with Internet of Things or play with hardware at home, it's because you had some idea that you wanted to implement. And not just an idea. You've got the best idea ever. At least that's how I am anyway. Like I think of something, I'm like, honey, I got like the best idea ever. She's like, yeah. And so you might have heard, you hear a friend talking like, oh yeah, I had this Raspberry Pi, it was really cool, I put some hardware up to it, I made an LED turn on, it was awesome. And you're thinking, okay, well yeah, then I'm gonna go out and get myself a Raspberry Pi, I'm gonna hook some things up to it, I'm gonna make my awesome idea happen. Of course, then you get your Raspberry Pi and you realize you can't do anything with this. Out of the box, it does nothing. Okay? You have to have a power supply to it. You have to have an SD card for it. You might want to put it in a case. And then you have to realize you have to put an operating system on the SD card. And then you realize after a couple of hours that you've made a huge mistake. And you feel like you're in way over your head. And that's because hardware is hard. It's not like software where you can just download some packages and start playing around on your computer. You actually have physical things that you have to figure out, stuff that you've probably never messed with before, especially if you've done mostly software. People get scared when they talk about volts and amps and power and stuff like that. So hardware can be hard, but it's not that hard. So if you just raise a hand, who here develops software, writes software before a living or mostly as a hobby? Yeah, almost everyone. If you're smart enough to figure that out, you are smart enough to figure out hardware. At least for hobby stuff at home. So, quick question. Sorry, who are the software people again? Okay, question for you. Quick question. I have this awesome idea for software. What language should I write it in?
It's a loaded question.
Best idea ever. Just no, I don't need to. I don't want to worry with the details. Just tell me which language I should write it in.
Whatever you're most familiar with.
Okay, that's not. I just need you to tell me a language.
C#.
Okay. And I've got this. Like I've got a Mac and a Windows and Linux. Like I've heard those three things. Like which platform should I target?
Well, if you're doing C#, well, more than likely Windows.
Okay. So it turns out like I need to write like some Linux admin thing, and that's not helpful at all, right? So that's what I get a lot when people come and talk to me about hardware. They're like, hey, I've heard about like this Arduino and Raspberry Pi stuff. Which one should I use? I'm like, I don't know. What are you trying to do? There are literally hundreds of platforms out there that you can use to play with hardware. You've got things like the Creator CI20, Intel Edison, Arduino, Arduino, Raspberry Pi, Spark, Cubbyboard, BeagleBone, Tessel, Arduino Uno, Embed. There's hundreds of them. And any one of them can probably do what you're looking to do in some form or another, but some of them maybe can't. And so you're looking at all these platforms and you're thinking, so which one should I use? And this is unfortunately what people rely on. This is actually a table I got from Rewrite, where the Intel Edison had just come out and one of their writers did a comparison chart of Intel Edison, Raspberry Pi, and Arduino Uno. And I hate these. These are the worst. Because if you're looking at this, you're thinking 0.002 megs of memory, 14, I don't even know what GPIO is, but it's only got 14 and these have 40. The clock speed is 16 megahertz, like what is this, 1980? And so you may never choose that, but it might be the perfect solution for your project at home. And so please do not choose a platform this way. If you do, you are going to be massively disappointed. This is not the way to choose a platform. So these are things that I think about when I'm trying to choose a platform for a project at home. There's a lot of things to consider. There's connectivity. Is it Ethernet, Bluetooth, or Wi-Fi? Or some other thing like cell? What kind of power do I need to supply to it? Does it have pulse width modulation? What language do I want to write in? Does it have a DAC on it? So there's a lot of things that can weed out what you choose. And so there are hundreds of platforms. I obviously cannot cover hundreds of platforms in 45 minutes and how you would choose one. So what I hope you can get out of this is some thought process of how I go through and choosing these. And we're only going to talk about 5 of them. We're going to talk about Intel Edison, Raspberry Pi, Spark, Arduino, and Tessel. And I chose these 5, first of all, because those are the 5 I have at home. And second, because I think they represent a pretty good mix of what you find out there. So, and we can't talk about all of the features on all of them, so really we're going to break these down into 5 categories: features, setup, learning curve, cost, and community. We kind of grade all these platforms and talk about strengths and weaknesses in each of them. Okay. Art, compliments of my daughter who wanted to help out with my talk, so there'll be some slides. Yeah, thank you for So the first one we're going to talk about is Arduino. I've got an Arduino Uno here, about the size of a credit card. So let's talk about the pros of an Arduino. Arduino is by far the most adopted platform. It's been around the longest as far as hobby projects, Internet of Things. If you have a project idea, somebody has already done it with an Arduino and their code's online, like almost guaranteed. Or some form of it, and you can reuse that. They've got a pretty sweet IDE that helps you get code onto your Arduino platform. And it's pretty low power. I put a star next to the power usage because Arduino is such a massive ecosystem. They have very low power, small Arduinos, all the way up to like 32-bit processor platforms that also run Arduino. Arduino isn't just this specific thing. Arduino is a language that runs on firmware that you can put on a variety of different microcontrollers. And so generally power usage is good. And so the bread and butter of Arduino are the shields. And you've got these pins across the top and bottom that if you want to add functionality, like say you want to take the monitor the temperature or something, you can buy a temperature shield, stick it on top, and there's code ready to go. You plug it in, and very, very little code to get up and running on Arduino. The cons, however, are that Arduino code is based on something called wiring, and it's very C-like. I talked to a lot of people that are afraid or don't like C. Like the C Bible is like 200 pages or something, everything you need to know about C. It's really not that hard, especially when you deal with some of the complex things in other high-level languages. So, but it is a learning curve for people. Speed, again, I put the star next to it. Generally, these are, the way they started out were 8-bit microcontrollers that were underpowered. You're not going to do heavy computation on it, but turning on an LED and reading a button does not take a lot of memory or processing power. So that's why I say don't use the tables. Shield stack is an issue. You got all these shields, you start stacking them up, you get a giant Big Mac Arduino. They share all of these pins. And so what you can run into is shield 1 and shield 4 share pins, and then they'll collide and you run into issues. So you just need to be careful about that. And then shield cost. Out of the box, like this Arduino Uno cost me 25 bucks, I think. But it doesn't have any connectivity out of the box, other than connecting it to my computer. And so if I wanted to connect this like to Wi-Fi, I need to buy a Wi-Fi shield. That's going to run me 70 bucks. And so the shield cost can get pricey. And so kind of an overview, setup, features, cost, learning curve, community. Pretty good. The learning curve, like I said, with the C kind of like code can be a problem for some people. So for each of these platforms, what I want to do is give you, like I said, it's really with the Raspberry Pi that people are like, yeah, it's a $25 computer. Well, that's not how much it's going to cost you to get started working with it. And so for all these, I want to put just kind of a price. You're looking at like 30 bucks to get going with this. This was 25 and then a $5 power supply, plug it in. From there, I'm ready to actually start connecting hardware. So it's $30 just to get the platform turned on, and then you can go from there. anybody has questions while I'm going through your stuff. Okay, next up.
Yeah.
Raspberry Pi. I told her, I said, just draw me, I gave her a picture of the Raspberry Pi logo. I was like, just draw me the Raspberry. And she's like, okay. She came back, I was like, what's up? She's like, I want to put a rainbow behind it. That's not what I told you to do. Okay, Raspberry Pi. Pros, it's just Linux. There's a bunch of different varieties of Linux that you can put. This is a model, this is an A plus, I think. It's just Linux running on there. And so if you're already familiar with Linux, you're basically ready to start going down your hardware journey in Linux. It's fast. 700 megahertz, the Raspberry Pi 2 is faster than that. It has video, and so again, when you're talking about a platform for your project, if you need video, this thing is not going to help you. If you need high def out on a screen, Raspberry Pi is probably something you want to consider. And language support. So pretty much we've got JavaScript, C, C++, Python. You can even use some C# with mono on this to talk to hardware. The cons, it's Linux. Meaning, a lot of people don't understand. For those of you that were here for the last presentation, we can turn the popcorn popper on and the light and stuff. That requires very, very little overhead. Bytes of memory, you can do that on an 8 megahertz system clock. And it would be just as fast as you push a button and turn things on. And so there's a lot of overhead that comes with Linux. You're running an entire operating system on this thing, trying to get to your hardware. In my opinion, that's a little bit of a con. Because of that, it's a power hog. Now, I know Raspberry Pi, it's obviously not using as much power as your laptop or your home machine, but in the world of embedded things, this thing uses a ton of power. You are not going to power it with a battery for any substantial amount of time unless you have like a giant car battery bank. And because of that, I think it's a little bit overkill for a lot of projects. But if you're comfortable in Linux, hey, who cares if it's overkill? Only 25 bucks. Okay, so setup. I gave it a C on setup because you got to do some things. You got to get an OS on the SD card. You got to get it in. Once you start doing hardware, you have to download packages. You got a lot of things to install, and the learning curve can be pretty big. I also put, I had cost on there, but cost a little bit. You have to put a case on it. Like a case here. It doesn't have Wi-Fi. It's really easy to add. You just put one of these $7 USB things on it. So really cheap to add Wi-Fi to it. And then I got some of these. I went through a phase where I was making these boxes out of cereal boxes. I have some plans online, so if you want a cereal box case for your Raspberry Pi. Getting started cost around 60 bucks. That includes the Pi, an SD card, a power supply. You can cheap out on the case and just use the cereal box if you want. So not too bad. Okay. Who here has heard of the Intel Edison? Okay, a few people. Intel Edison is kind of the new guy in the scheme of things. I mean, everybody's new. Like half of these platforms are not even 3 or 4 years old. I've got an Edison here. It's attached to a bunch of these SparkFun blocks I'll talk about in a minute, but it's just the blue part. Very small, very powerful. So the pros on an Intel Edison, very low power. It has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built onto the chip. And so again, if you're looking at this, this is a breakout board that it's sitting on. The Intel Edison is just this blue square right there. So it's small and is faster and has more memory than the Raspberry Pi. I know I said not to compare them, but when you're running Linux, which Intel Edison does, that's an okay time to compare memory and things like that. Okay, integration is an issue on the Intel Edison. It has a tiny 70-pin connector. I have one of these blocks here. It's this little black thing. It's a 70-pin tiny connector, and so bringing this thing home and soldering up a wire to it to an LED is just not happening. you have to have some sort of a breakout board, and I'll show you that in just a second. The documentation, not great for Edison yet. I don't want to bag on Intel, but it really is sort of a corporate America-y kind of thing where they got the product out and the documentation can wait until later, or maybe the community will build it for us. Not like a lot of the other platforms that really take a lot of effort into making the user experience very easy. Cost on the Edison, you're looking at about $50 just for the Edison, and then you're going to have to, like I said, SparkFun sells these stackable, they call them blocks, that have different functionality, that have that little connector on it. And you can stack them up here. I have a GPIO, a general purpose input output, and a analog board, and then a base board to connect it all to. The Edison runs at 1.8 volts, which is a pain. A lot of the hobby stuff, sensors and other things, are going to be 3.3 volts, probably lowest normally, or 5 volts. And so if you want to connect something like that to 1.8 volts on the Edison, you have to be careful. There's some extra circuitry to level shift, things like that. And so while it is great for low power, it is not great for integrating other things in your hobby stuff. So setup on this, like I said, the documentation wasn't very good. I went through it, had mistakes in it that sidetracked me for a couple hours. It has good features, cost, not great. The learning curve is going to be pretty big on this. Again, with Raspberry Pi being Linux, there are a lot of things that people have written that run on the Pi for hardware. Intel is still getting there. The Edison's still not quite there. And so a lot of that is going to be figuring it out yourself. The community, I also gave a C because Intel has a forum that was sort of like, we're going to host a forum, you guys figure it out. And so when you have a problem on your Edison, you will spend hours digging through the forums trying to find somebody else that had something similar and troubleshooting it that way. So, the cost to get started on an Edison is going to be around $90. Again, these costs are just getting the platform to a state that's running where you can start to hook up extra hardware, which will cost you extra money. Okay, up next is the Tessel. Tessel is, again, it's about the size of a credit card. For those that want to know more about the Tessel, I have a talk right after lunch where we will go in depth on this and do some demos that is pretty cool. Better than this talk, if you're wondering. Pros on that, it runs JavaScript. So you code in JavaScript and push the code to the Tessel and run it that way. Modules. So what's cool about this, and this is really great for when you're getting started, is knowing how to connect hardware. And so if you want to add a camera to your project, Tessel sells a camera module. You buy it, you plug it in, and then you start writing JavaScript. You do an npm install on the camera package, and then you're ready to start writing JavaScript to control it. So out of the box, really great. The modules really make a huge difference. It abstracts away the hardware so that you don't have to know how to hook up capacitors and resistors and sensors and things. They abstract all of that away. And then not just abstracting the hardware, they also abstract away in the node libraries that they've written. When you load this thing up, and I'll show it in my talk after lunch, to take a picture with this, you do a camera.take picture. You know, it's really quite nice. It has Wi-Fi built in, so no need for an extra shield or extra cost there. Cons, it runs JavaScript. So a lot of people hate JavaScript. Any JavaScript haters in here? He's like, no. Some people aren't a fan of JavaScript. I get it. But the idea behind the Tessel was to create a platform that web developers could get started with quickly. So there's not a huge learning curve of, I need to figure out some Arduino programming language. It's just, I know how to write JavaScript. Let me get in and play with it. For all of this super nice abstraction, plugging in a camera module and doing a .take picture, you pay for it. And so cost is an issue with the Tessel. Totally worth it if you're looking for rapid prototyping. That is the whole purpose in my mind of Tessel. You have an idea that you want to take Kickstarter by storm with because you're going to make the next billion-dollar hardware thing on Kickstarter. Tessel is where you would start to like get it together into a working state. I put HTTPS issues because of how SSL certificate algorithms work and decoding those. The Tessel can only handle a certain number of them, so some certificates on sites will have issues that the Tessel can't talk to. And not robust. So this is not something, again, that you want to put into a production environment. The Wi-Fi is a little sketchy at times. Some of the sensors, while they do provide a high level of abstraction, have issues like when you plug in the temperature sensor, heat from the Tessel bleeds onto the module, and you'll just, if you let it sit for 5 hours, you'll see the temperature just slowly climbing. So there's some things like that that not meant for, like I say, a production environment, but awesome for prototyping and just messing around. So pretty good marks for the Tessel. If you're first getting started and you have the money, I would definitely recommend Tessel as a starting point. Probably the easiest, lowest barrier to entry. To get started, you're looking at $100. The Tessel itself is $75. You're not going to do anything useful with that, so you probably want to buy at least one module. They run anywhere from $25 to $50. Okay, last one, Spark. So the Spark core is this little guy. It's about the size, maybe even a little smaller than the Edison, except it's got these legs that I soldered onto it. Or actually, sorry, it comes like that with the legs on it. Let's talk about the pros of the Spark. The Spark Cloud is Spark's bread and butter. They have built an amazing back end to this where you can very quickly, with very little code, push stuff up to the cloud and publish that out to other services. So if you're looking for true Internet of Things, getting connected and pushing stuff up to a service, the Spark Cloud is quite amazing. Power usage is very good. You could power this off of a battery for a decent amount of time, not like weeks or anything. It's small, and it's Arduino compatible. So the code that this runs is based on wiring, just like Arduino. So if you're familiar with Arduino, this is a great starting point. Almost all of your Arduino code will run out of the box on this thing. You can also do C, C++, and they've enhanced with some libraries for the Spark Cloud stuff that makes it really easy. The cons, again, some people struggle with the C syntax. Integration, again, you can plug this thing in and it's up and running and you can make one of the LEDs on it turn off and on. But getting it into, hooking it up to sensors and stuff, it's not like Tessel where you can just plug things into it. You'll have to actually figure out some hardware connections and things like that. So, and with that, there's a bit of a learning curve. Again, it doesn't abstract away a lot of the hardware. You're still going to have to figure that out. So learning curve really is the only thing I'd give on the Spark. These guys are doing some really cool stuff. They've recently come out with this is a Spark core, they've come out with the Photon. The core cost you, I think, $30 or $40. The Photon is smaller, pin compatible, runs all the code, and is like $19. It's coming out in June. They also have just created the Electron, that's a Wi-Fi chip on top, so this has Wi-Fi built in. The Electron has a cell module on it. And so out of the box, they've partnered with cell companies worldwide. You can publish stuff over a cell network, so you don't need a Wi-Fi connection. So they're doing some really cool things. Cost $30 just to get it out, get it plugged in and started. And then, like I said, you have to go through the learning curve after that of hardware. So that kind of gives us to this point. We talked about 5 platforms. And we get this maybe complicated looking thing of, you might say, well, how is this any different than the table at the start? We're just giving these random grades. Like, why wouldn't I just find like the most green? It looks like Tessel has the most green, so I just choose Tessel. That's not the point. The point is, and this is like the biggest takeaway, that if you're looking for a platform for a project, you need to figure out what the strengths and sweet spot of the platform is and how that matches up with what is most important for your project. So if getting it together in an hour is important, then pay the money and you don't really care about cost, pay the money for the Tessel. If size is an issue, then you're going to want to go with an Intel or maybe a Spark Core, or maybe even one of the small Arduino, like an Arduino or something like that. And so it's really just figuring out, you have to understand, like I was asking earlier, it's not fair to just say, tell me what platform to use. What's important? Figure out what that is, match it to what the platforms do well. And that takes time. You know, you can't just hold them out like a debit card to pick one out and start using it. Maybe you just want to write in JavaScript because you don't want to mess with any of the other languages, then you're going to have to pick a platform that supports that. So I think you can get it. Okay, so that's the hardware side of it. Really quick, I just wanted to mention putting the internet in the Internet of Things. The other side of this is once you have some hardware connected, you've got a sensor connected to your Arduino, what are you going to do with it? And that's the other part of figuring out what platform to choose. If you just want to print it out on a console, which is super boring, then any of them probably would work fine for you. But if you want to monitor it, there's other things to consider. There's great services. Most of these platforms can integrate with any one of these. You've got things like UbiDots, Twitter, Amazon S3, Twilio, if this then that, Dropbox. SparkFun has a free data service that you can push data up to if you just want to have something to view it. Plotly does graphs. So if you connect a temperature sensor to your Arduino and you say, what do you want to do with that? I just want to know what the current temperature is at home and what it's been all day. Plotly is perfect for that. They've got a free feature. You hook it in, you can go online, it's from anywhere, and you can see a live graph of that temperature that your Arduino is pushing up to their service. Maybe you want to install it at a vacation home and get a text if it gets too hot. Twilio is great for that. They have libraries to send yourself a text or give yourself a call through their API. And so there's a lot of options. This doesn't even scratch the surface of what's available out there, but also things to consider. If you're going to be doing some heavy API usage, you need to make sure that the platform can handle that. Okay. Before I do that, I just want to do a quick note on power. One of the biggest questions I get is, I don't understand power. I don't know what volts, amps, all that means. For your projects at home, power is really simple. You don't need to know any of that. Power to you means the following. If I want to run this from the wall outlet, you don't care about power at all. The wall outlet can give you as much juice as you're ever going to need for your project. If you, however, want to power it via battery, that's when you need to start worrying. Because what power means is, do I need a battery like this? Or can I run it off a little lithium ion like this? And for how long? And so a lot of people get really hung up with that. The more power it uses, the higher number you see on power, the more juice it needs, the bigger battery. Similar if you want to do something like solar, things like that. The one other thing I forgot to mention on the Raspberry Pi, Adafruit sells this thing called Pi Cobbler. You plug in this little ribbon cable into the header pins over here, and this breaks them out to pins that you can just stick into a breadboard. Kind of a must-have if you want to breadboard ideas out with a Raspberry Pi. My demo, I found out this morning, isn't going to work, but it's still going to, I'll still show it to you. So, just to give you an example of how I go about choosing a platform. Raise of hands, who here has heard of the Amazon Dash button? Okay, decent number. For those that don't know, Amazon came out with this, it's a little button that you can stick next to your laundry detergent. So when you run out of laundry detergent, you push a button, it will order more laundry detergent through Amazon for you and send it to your house. As if we weren't lazy enough, they figured out how to make us. And so that was all the rage. They actually released it on April 1st, and so everybody thought it was an April Fool's joke, and they were like, no, really, this is actually a thing. And so I wanted to, people see stuff like that and they're like, wow, this is amazing. When I'm thinking, oh, how would I do that? That's not really too hard. And so I wanted to create sort of like a parody or a joke of it. And so I needed to, that was my thing. I was like, I want to make an Amazon Dash button. That's kind of a joke. And so what were my requirements? I wanted to do it quickly. Like I had like a day window where the joke was going to be funny. Maybe it never was funny, but after that, it was old news. I needed it to be small because I wanted to make a button look kind of like the Amazon Dash button. And I needed to be able to do it, well, I already said quickly. I needed to be able to put it together quickly. So what I came up with was, this is my little Amazon Dash button. This thing took me about 4 hours, 3 of which was figuring out how to cut out the cardboard box. I went through like 6 iterations of the case. All it has inside is a spark cord that I soldered a button to. It's got a button on top. And on the actual spark cord, there's about 30 lines of code. I wrote a little monitor app in Node, which was about another 40 lines of code. It was 100 lines of code, under 100 lines of code total, to put this thing together. And I don't think I can get sound on this, but it's not going to play sound through the HDMI for me.
Upgrade it, chart it, point it, zoom it, press it, snap it, work
hold on.
it, quick erase it, write it.
Stop. You guys can see. Okay.
Buy it, use it, break it, fix it, trash it, change it, melt, upgrade it, chart it, point it, zoom it, press it, snap it, work it, quick erase it, write it, cut it, paste it, save it, load it, check it, quick rewrite it, plug it, play it, earn it, rip it, drag it, drop it, zip, unzip it, lock it, fill it, call it, find it, view it, code it, jump it, load.
Oh dear. If you couldn't hear it, it said, if you couldn't hear it, it says, why don't you just go to the store and get some more paper towels yourself? Shout out to my friend Aaron Ball for providing the angry voice over. So, just an example of having a short amount of time putting something together. It's really not that hard to do this stuff once you go through a little bit of a learning curve on the hardware. I wanted to leave some time. I think I've left, I left a bit of time here. For those that have specific questions, I wanted to be able to provide some value of if you actually have some ideas or you wanted some input on what kind of a platform to use for your specific project. I want to take some questions on that. Tomorrow, the people at Spark and also the people at Technical Machine and the people who make the Tessel were awesome enough to send me a whole bunch of hardware that I'm going to have in the Hack Center tomorrow. If you want to come in and actually play with one, I'll have Tessels and I'll have Spark cores. So all you need is a laptop, bring it in. You can do a getting started activity on either one of them. It'll take about 25 minutes. You can stop at any time during the day. I also have some other stuff there if you want to check out, some of the stuff you can hook up to Raspberry Pi and things like that. But if you want to do some hands-on, come by the Hack Center tomorrow. I'll be there all day. Any questions? And then, like I say, anybody that wants to kind of hit me with project questions, or if you want to disperse and something, you want to come and talk, we can do that either way. Yeah.
I have a project that's running on SparkCore right now, but where it's installed, there's a lot of noise on the 2.4 gig spectrum, so it just keeps dropping out and coming back on. Do you know of any platforms with GPIO that do the 5 gigahertz? Like all the
Yeah, I mean, as far as Wi-Fi, yeah, you can buy. I'm not sure if there's an Arduino shield. Arduino is probably the platform I have the least amount of experience with, but you can buy just RF modules that you could connect to a Spark board that just runs on like 900 megahertz. That probably has just a very simple, like an SPI interface that the Spark board can handle. And so you wouldn't get a lot of, it would limit your throughput. But if you're not sending a lot of data, that can be a really good option. Just buying just real cheap, you can get them for like $10. A little RF module. Just protocol for that. That's probably what I would do.
Of the 5 platforms you analyzed, in terms of like robotics, where you have like motor controllers and infrared sensors and that type of thing, which of those platforms would you recommend?
For robotics, if you want to get really crazy with like analyzing data and doing some crazy robotic stuff, the Edison might be nice because it's low power, so you don't want to tether to like an outlet or something. But probably Arduino's super popular with robotics. The Spark board can probably handle anything you need to do, just like with a motor driver on it. And then all the sensors, like even if you have 5 sensors, like a wall detection or a line tracer, things like that, even very underpowered processors can handle that kind of stuff. And so for robotics, I'd probably go Spark or Intel if you wanted to have horsepower on it to do computations. Any others?
How do you network that dash button competitor you make?
Okay, so the way this works is the code that runs on this uses the Spark Cloud, which it has this really cool thing. There's a node library that you can you run. It's a listener, and you can publish events. It's a single line of code. You can publish events from this. So all I did was when it detected a button press, it published a push event that then would get pushed out to my node app that was running, that was listening. And so if it detected an event from the hardware, then it would actually do the heavy lifting of calling the Twilio API. And then as far as the Twilio stuff, if anybody has not used Twilio, I highly recommend it if you need to do anything SMS or call-based. Super easy to use, supported in a lot of languages.
Is the Spark Cloud free to use?
Yes.
Will it always be free?
Good question. Spark is doing extremely well, at least from the outside. I mean, they're really innovating a ton and getting a lot. I mean, they're growing really fast. Whether they want to monetize that in the future, I don't know.
And is there a dashboard where you manage all of your Spark modules?
Yes, they actually have a dashboard that'll show you any cores that you've claimed, and then you actually push code to them from that browser. So you can keep this plugged in at home, and you can push code to it from work just in the Spark dashboard. It's really cool. Yeah, I mean, and you can make that happen on like a Raspberry Pi, but obviously you've got to create the plumbing to push firmware down and have it restart it and stuff like that. So yeah, Spark, yeah, a lot of cool things coming out of them. Anybody else?
When are you going to be tomorrow at the hardware center or whatever that is?
When?
Yeah.
All day. So I'll be there like probably 9 o'clock until 5 o'clock. So welcome to come by, ask me questions, check out Sidwar. Yeah,
We're already said you have some of this already. You can bring that in.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Cool. Thanks, guys.